If you've been wondering whether therapy is for you, but you don't know who to choose, I'm going to be talking about three of the most popular modalities that therapists train in and use as kind of guiding theories or the way of working, and how that might relate to the kind of problems you want to address and whether or not it might be right for you. Keep in mind, this is independent of whether or not the practitioner is right for you, or if they're trained well, or if they're just well equipped to deal with what you're going through. It's not so simple as to say these types of therapists are better than others. It's an individual. So remember, there are all those quirks of an individual, plus the theories that they bring in from what we call the modalities. I should have explained. A modality is a type of therapy, a way of thinking, a school of thought that informs how that therapist thinks and practices. And of course, they can bring in more than one. So I'm simplifying a lot in this video, but it's just to give people an idea of what they might want to start looking for when they are looking at therapists, and to get them understanding what the descriptions of what the therapist says about themselves, how they might make sense for you when you're looking for some help. Hi, my name is Maris. I'm a psychotherapist and a psychology doctoral student in London, and on this channel I share my journey as a trainee and anything you might find useful. Subscribe and stick around if that's interesting to you. So we're going to start with the three types. The types I'm going to discuss today are psychodynamic, humanistic, which is a pretty big umbrella term, but I think it's easier this way, and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So let's start with psychodynamic. So psychodynamic is the school of thought established by Sigmund Freud. And before we start, I need to try and dispel some myths before we get into psychodynamic, because people may switch off when they hear it. When I did my A-level or my college certificate in psychology, actually there was quite a lot of criticism of Freud and his ideas. And sure, there should be as there are for any thinker. But I think the problem was that it started to make me think that psychodynamic equaled Freud, and it's not. Freud established the field, and a lot of what he said are now standard words that we use in psychology and in society generally. For example, being defensive, passive aggressive, these are all things that he established, and yet people try and pick just the weirdest theories that he had and say, God, isn't this strange? Everything he said must have been just completely irrelevant. They forget all the huge contributions that he's made to psychotherapy and psychology more broadly. Just to dispel that myth, it's not all about Freud. It has come a long way since the 100 years that it's been around. It's not just about the past. The past is very significant, and we'll get into that. You're not just going to be reviewing the past or reviewing the past again and again. It is a huge part, but it's not the case that it doesn't relate to your present. Very much you're going back there in order to address what's going on in the present. So I think those are the two biggest myths. Try and be a bit more open-minded, just because I know I wasn't to begin with, until I started my doctorate and got way more into it, and now it's probably my favorite modality. But let's go into it. What does it look like? So psychodynamic psychotherapy, psychoanalysis is a bit more particular. We won't get into that. I'll just say psychodynamic for now. It's very developmental, and what that means is you consider the individual based on how they have developed into the person they are now. So development is about stages, it's about progress, it's about history, right? It's like becoming. How did you become who you are? Well, you have to look back. So early experiences are incredibly significant in psychodynamic psychotherapy. They will be referenced very often. And some people find that a bit jarring, because they're like, well, I'm here for my problems right now. Why are we talking so much from then? So the rationale is that you cannot see the present without reference to the past. In the same way, if you've never seen a tiger, the first time you see a tiger, you'll be shocked. But when you have seen a tiger before, how do you know that you've seen a tiger before? You have memories of it. There was a video of it. You saw one in person, whatever it was. You may have memories associated with the first time you saw it because it was beautiful and scary, etc. Even though you're like, well, I just want to talk about the animal as it exists in my mind today, or the one that's in my life today, or whatever. I've chosen a strange example. Point is that you can't reference that thing without going back to the past, even if you're doing that in a non-conscious way. So when we do talk about our history, we talk about our relationship with our parents and stuff like that, that is all to say, like, right, well, what is the framework with which you started to understand human relationships? How did you start relating to people? And how does that live in you today? It doesn't mean that you're defined by the past. It means that today is painted with the past. It's just an exploration. It's about developing a hypothesis that is alive and ongoing. So it's not going to be the case, for example, at least, a well-trained psychodynamic practitioner is not going to say, well, you had an emotionally unavailable mother, and that's because that's the reason you can't do X, Y, Z. No. There would be an exploration if that was something that was going on in your history, and they might try and work it out with you. Is that relevant to what's going on now? I wonder. So it's much more curious than people think, or it should be at least. It's a developmental, hypothetical, let's figure it out, let's explore. Because you cannot know 100%. You cannot know, well, I'm depressed now because this happened back then. I have anxiety because this happened back then. You can't know for sure, but you can guess and you can explore. If it feels right, if it feels like it makes sense, if it starts to bring other things into focus, then perhaps it's useful. What that allows you to do when you come back to the present, or when you begin referencing the present again, is you say, well, now that I know that thing about my past and what I went through and how I still make sense of it, or maybe I'm not sure how I make sense of it, that does feel like it links to what's going on now. And I'm not sure how, we're still working it out. But now that I know, maybe the next time I'm in a situation that brings those feelings up, I can say, it reminds me of that thing I talked about in therapy. It does remind me of that part of my life. That's been with me for a long time. This feeling has been alive in me for a long time. I can feel it in the here and now. Now I get to make a choice. Because what happens before that? Before that, you just have the feeling, you're like, oh, I just get angry sometimes. Well, why? And in what situations? So in therapy, you might get to realize, I tend to get angry when I'm undermined by this type of person because it reminds me of XYZ. And that can go on and on. What you get to do then is say, I feel that feeling of anger now. Can I take a pause and say, this is what we've been talking about. It's here right now. Can I make a different decision? So it's not the case that it is all in the past with psychodynamic. It does reference it heavily, but the point is to make what was unconscious, you weren't aware of, more aware, more conscious, and then you can say, you know what, I think I know what's going on. I'm going to choose not to do the thing I've always done before. I'm going to choose a different way. So that's how I'd summarize it in a nutshell. So let's move on to humanistic. So humanistic is an umbrella term for the types of psychotherapies that tend to focus on personhood, on values, on existential themes. So it's quite philosophical. That doesn't mean it's not practical, but it is more about meaning making, sense making as a person. So what is it that you value in life? What is it you want to achieve? And it's not about achievement in the sense of like ambition necessarily, unless that's important to you, but how do you make sense of what's good? What is a meaningful life to you? Those are big existential questions. So in humanism broadly, you're dealing with those themes. It's like, how do you make sense of what's been going on for you now? And what is it that you want out of therapy? Why do you want to come to therapy? For what purpose? Is to do more of what? Okay, you can be free of ailments, of something that's holding you back, but once it stops holding you back, where are you going? I think all these kind of existential ideas are really useful in this frame, because what it means is it's less about, oh, I'm just going to deal with what's bad, but actually it can tap into what is significant for you and say, right, well, how do we use that guiding light, that kind of North Star to say, right, this is the reason I'm going this way. Also, if you think about it the other way, what if you grew up and people only gave you love or attention if you did something a certain way? If you were a good boy or girl, then you were given attention and you were praised. If you were expressing feelings that were negative, you were shunned, or you were ignored, or you were punished, or whatever it is. That adds a condition. So what does that mean? It means only if you are this, then you can have the attention, you can have the love, or whatever. If you see that in order to be accepted, that there are these conditions, that you are loved if, then you start to create potentially some conditions that you put on yourself and you say, well, I'm not allowed to express that feeling. And you may not know that, but you might have learned like, okay, we don't let that one out. We don't let that one out. Or perhaps you perform for other people. Perhaps you need to be funny for people to pay attention to you. Perhaps you need to give them what they want in order for you to feel welcomed. Those are all conditions. Now, in person-centered approaches, it tends to be about being able to be with that person and acknowledge what it feels like to have grown up with that, to have experienced that, to feel for what it's like to have these conditionalities, to notice them there in the session, and to say, right, it seems like you only ever felt worthy when you were being entertaining. What is it like needing to always entertain? So you start to see, right, can we peel away this I'm okay if, I'm worthy if, and just get to the core of, well, you're a person and you've done what you've done to try and adapt to what's been going on in your life, and perhaps that's no longer serving you. Perhaps it did some good things for you in the past, and maybe it's related to the troubles you're having now. Another thing that's important in humanistic or person-centered modalities is this idea of self-actualization. So we all have this inherent need for growth, to become what we have always wanted to be, to move towards meaning, to embrace our ideal self, you could say. Why are we here? We're not just here to be in balance with things and just sit down and just be okay, as long as it's not too stimulating or bad or whatever. It's like, no, what's the purpose? What are you here to do? Can we start to look at that? Or what does it feel like? And maybe you don't, and that's okay too. Maybe it's always felt like you don't know what your purpose is, and that's something you should be exploring too, because that's the truth of your experience in the here and now. I think of humanistic approaches as quite free, open. It's very much led by you. In a way, a lot of the time it's non-directive, which means the therapist is not applying any ideas of which way you should go, what you should change or not change. That's more going to come from you. They're allowing the exploration, the opening, the unfolding of what's happening. The final one I'll go to is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. So CBT is mostly about changing thought patterns in a way that's more adaptive. So you have thoughts and belief that drive your behavior. Your behavior shows you that you're capable or incapable of doing things, which leads back to your beliefs. And then you have this kind of cycle of your thoughts influencing your behavior influencing your thoughts, and your feelings are also there, but you can't just edit your feelings, but they are impacted by the thoughts, beliefs, and the actions. Now, because thoughts, beliefs, and actions are influenceable, so you can interrogate them, you can outline, I think this is how I think about myself in a social situation, I am awkward, I am strange, those kinds of things. You can outline that thought, you can specify that thought. In CBT, what you're doing is pulling out all of those maladaptive thoughts. Maladaptive meaning they don't work for you. They're putting you in a position that is not working for you. And they say, right, well, why is it that you have this belief? Is this actually true? Can we find a way to figure out, is this working for you or not? And if it's not, let's find a better one that's going to be true or truer, so that you can actually behave and be in the way that you want to be. Then you have the behaviors, right? So it's not just thinking about thoughts or thinking about beliefs, it's also behaviors. So a lot of CBT is about experiments, behavioral experiments. Your therapist may give you things like homework to go home and challenge yourself to do something specific that will prove to you, oh, I can do that thing that I've always been afraid of. But you might be exposed to it gradually. So for example, if you were afraid to go outside, you might just be challenged to open the windows and stand there, looking outside during the daytime. That might be a lot for some people. Now, if that's still comfortable and you're like, no, I'm just scared of going outside, you might say, right, well, can you open your door, crack it open a little bit, and then close it again? For some people, that may not be possible. They may just let other people bring in shopping and stuff like that. If that's comfortable, what's the next thing? How about you open the door but don't step outside? Do you see what I mean? So you keep going, one step outside to the gate and back, whatever it is. So the point of this is to challenge yourself to the point where you think, oh, what I thought was impossible actually is possible. And I'm challenging myself bit by bit, building that confidence. Another big thing in CBT, it's very present focused, but also it's focused on you being able to become effectively your own therapist outside of the sessions. So once you start to figure out ways of challenging your thoughts and beliefs, challenging your behaviors in a way that supports that change, then you can actually do it yourself, because the therapist is showing you, hey, this is here's how we work. Here's how you evaluate the thoughts. Here's how we start to think about more balanced thoughts. You do it that way. And then when you design an experiment, same thing. Once you see the therapist do it with you, you can start to do it yourself. Generally, and this is, as I said, I'm thinking about all these areas as distinct, but therapists will overlap in their interests. Generally, CBT doesn't have that much reference for the past. They may think about where it started just to give you kind of a grounding. We don't have to keep referencing the past. We just look at the belief as it exists in you now, and then correct that or find a more adaptive version of that. CBT is very popular because of how easily it can be applied to the healthcare system versus other approaches like the ones I mentioned earlier. They are very focused on measurement in a way that other approaches are not. And so they have been given the title, CBT approaches have been given the title of evidence-based, though that's a misnomer. It's not any more evidence-based than any other type of therapy. It's just that the way that they measure how you feel in the beginning, anxious 1 to 5, etc., all that kind of stuff, and then measure at the end. It's very tailored to the scientific technique, and therefore it's measurable, but that does not mean that it's good for an individual in the long term. It just means in the beginning you said you had a 4, and at the end you have a 2. Is that really telling you about the development of the person? Is that really referencing the wholeness of the person? Now, CBT is useful if you need something quick and something that you want to kind of address and get on with it now because you're not really coping well. So for example, with phobias, a lot of CBT work will be around exposure. So you'll just be exposed to the stimulus similar to the behavioral experiments we talked about. And sometimes that's just the most practical way. You can't do 20 sessions of psychodynamic psychotherapy hoping your phobia will go away. It will help as well, but some people just want to say, hey, I really have this one problem, I don't really want to address something else, let's just focus on the problem at hand and I want to get on with it. CBT is likely a good choice for you. So that's it. That's a quick one, but hopefully it's useful. And if you have any other thoughts around, I don't know what kind of therapist to choose or what modality, then leave it in the comment box below and I'll try and get to that. Hope that was useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Look after yourself.